Lessons podcast, hosted by Angela Anderson.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Get Your Fucking Lessons People podcast. If you're here with me for the first time, welcome. I am grateful that you are here. This is a safe space. This is your go-to spot for real talk, for powerful perspective, and those nuggets of wisdom that hit just right. Whether you're here for your own lesson or to pass on wisdom, little nuggets of wisdom to someone else, you're in for a treat. Each episode, I bring you real, raw, and relatable, truth-packed lessons that shine a light on the things that are often buried. The unspoken struggles, the uncomfortable, overlooked truths, the silent stressors that we ignore because we think they don't pertain to us until they do. These are the things that quietly alter our energy. They shake up our peace. They influence our lives and challenges our mental well-being. It's time we talk about them. Why the profanity? Get your fucking lessons, people. Well, life is messy. It's unpredictable, chaotic, and at times downright absurd. Life does not censor itself, and neither do we. Sometimes the most reflective truths are best expressed with a well-placed expletive. So let's get into it and get our fucking lessons, shall we? Today's lesson, we're going to take a peek inside the American dream from a cultural perspective. That culture being Black America. I feel like there's no better time than the present to have this conversation, to share this lesson and this perspective. The American dream, as we all know, is traditionally defined as the ideal that every U.S. citizen has an equal opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative, except if you're Black in America. The American dream has a profoundly different and often deferred meaning for Black Americans. Their pursuit of this dream has been uniquely marked by centuries of systemic oppression, discrimination, and a continuous struggle for fundamental rights and equality. So I'll start with some historical context, take you down that path, and then bring it on home to share with you this perspective on the American dream from a Black American's perspective. So historical context and enduring barriers. Black Americans have, for Black Americans, this dream of the American dream has been a constant aspiration met with formidable historical and ongoing barriers. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy of chattel slavery and the Jim Crow laws from, I think, 1860 to about 1960. So, chattel slavery is a system where individuals are legally owned as personal property with no rights to choose their own lives or their own labor. I've often heard individuals say about blacks that had been enslaved, well, white people were slaves too. Blacks weren't the only ones that were slaves. Let me be clear. First of all, white, black, not real. But that's a lesson for a whole nother day. Immigrants to the U.S., German, Polish, Italian, Irish, many of them, yes, came to the, and yes, Africans. Many of the immigrants came to the U.S., yes, poor, and some were indentured servants. But there's a difference between indentured servitude and chattel slavery. While both systems are forced labor, they differ significantly in terms of, let's pick a few things: legal status of the enslaved individual, the duration of the servitude, and the very nature of the relationship between the enslaved and the enslaver. Let's start with indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is a contractual agreement where individuals voluntarily agree to work for a specified period, often to pay off a debt, such as passage to a new land, like America. With regards to duration is limited to a specific term, typically 4 to 7 years, after which the individual is released and considered free. While not entirely free, indentured servants had some legal rights and protections, including their right to property, and they were generally not supposed to be mistreated or abused. Indentured servants were often also housed, they were fed, they were clothed, but they were not paid wages. For example, European indentured servants, Eastern European, wherever European immigrants came to the Americans from that were poor, they would work off labor for passage into the New World, right? And they would work for a set period to pay off that passage. And then they were considered free. Now let's talk about chattel slavery. With chattel slavery, the slave is legally considered personal property of the owner, who has complete control over their lives. They can buy them, they can sell them, they can trade them like any other possession. The duration, lifelong. The status of an enslaved person is inherited by their children. Chattel slaves had no legal rights, and they were completely subject to the will of their owner. Chattel slaves were, as we all know, very often subjected to harsh treatment, including beatings, physical abuse, lynchings, and forced labor. For example, African slaves in the American South were treated as property. They were whipped. They were lynched. In chattel slavery, the slave is owned, while in indentured servitude, the individual is bound by a contract. So let's talk about freedom. Chattel slaves are permanently enslaved, while indentured servants eventually do gain their freedom. And as I stated, because chattel slavery is inherited, and we know indentured servitude was not, this is why many blacks in America have had the start. But let's get into some more of that. So what we know for sure is indentured servitude's contractual agreement, limited time, freedom. Chattel slavery, lifelong, inherited, no freedom. So with chattel slavery, Black people were denied any semblance of liberty, of property, or the ability to build generational wealth. Even after emancipation, the promise of full participation in America was largely crushed by, you guessed it, Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws enforced strict racial segregation and made Black Americans second-class citizens. This era systematically denied access to education, to economic opportunities, and to political power. The Jim Crow era refers to the period in America following the end of Reconstruction, so roughly from about 1870s until mid-1960. It was characterized by legal and societal segregation in the American South. It was an authorized political culture where slaves were again treated as second-class citizens. I'm reminded of South Africa during those days of apartheid, where that government also was an authoritarian political climate, and it became government policy, apartheid, meaning apartness. And the non-white majority, millions of non-white South Africans, forcibly removed the majority, the majority was Black Africans, took their land, and it was all characterized by a political culture where the, minority white population dominated the nation, and segregation was already a thing in South Africa. It was common, but apartheid actually officially enshrined that segregation as government policy, leading to increased persecution of the non-white majority, the people that look like me. So I bring this up because, as we know, our current sitting president has fast-tracked 50 white Africans as asylum seekers, all while ICE kidnaps the darkest of the berries, the Black and the brown, and they're being deported from America, immigrants. This system of segregation enforced by state and local laws affected almost every single aspect, if you can imagine, of daily life as a Black person in America. Educations, we're talking schools, public transportation, any public space. The Jim Crow system upheld these segregation laws, and government officials reinforced them, along with some, we'll call them vigilantes. At any rate, let's discuss some key aspects of the Jim Crow era. Legal segregation is what it was. Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in various aspects of life, including, as I stated, schools and public facilities and transportation, restaurants, etc. The disenfranchisement, say that 5 times fast, of Black voters. Their right to vote was challenged through methods like poll taxes or literary tests, which obviously kept many folks from voting. The separate but equal doctrine, Supreme Court, Legge versus Ferguson, I think it was 1896. Separate but equal facilities were put in practice, but in actuality, facilities for Black folks were, as we all know, inferior. Think about, the school systems and anything that was made available to the Black folks was inferior or subpar. Anyway, white folks were considered superior, and Black people were relegated to a subordinate status. And then came the violence and terror. The Jim Crow era was also marked by lots of violence and terror against the Black communities, including, as I stated previously, lynchings and other forms of racial intimidation. Finally, the civil rights movement, fueled by activism and legal challenges, much like we're seeing today, eventually led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed many of those Jim Crow laws and discriminatory practices in theory. So, those practices again included like segregation in schools and transportation, and so restrictions on Black folks trying to vote, and separate waiting rooms and restrooms for Black and white people. My parents, my grandparents lived through those times. My mother can remember as a child, whites only water fountains. At any rate, those Jim Crow laws, there was even, I think it's still on the books in South Carolina, but interracial marriage was illegal in South Carolina. True story. At any rate, Black folks weren't allowed to buy property, and all these terrible things during the Jim Crow era that had this very profound and lasting impact on the African American communities as a whole, which contributed obviously to economic hardship. Segregation and discrimination led to lower wages, limited jobs for Black folks, limited opportunities, and fewer educational opportunities for Black people. Social inequality. The Jim Crow system reinforced the system of white supremacy and created deep social inequalities. And we don't even want to get into the psychological damage, the constant threat of violence, and the discrimination had a very devastating impact on Black people's mental health and well-being. And then continued inequalities where, scholars still argue to this day that the legacy of the Jim Crow laws continue to impact Black communities today in terms of wealth inequality and educational disparities and some other social problems. So the traditional path to prosperity for most, right, often through stable employment and home ownership, has been systematically obstructed for some. Black Americans have historically faced and continue to face significant barriers in employment, including lower wages, even when when qualifications exceed those of your constituents. But limited access to stable jobs, to retirement benefits, and etc. And while we have seen many improvements, economic conditions for many Black Americans and the racial employment gap does remain. The racial wealth gap is stark and persistent. In, I believe it was 2022, there's a study that shows the median household income for Black folks at about $44,000 in wealth, which is more than 6 times less than the median white household, which averages $284,310. That's a big gap. But this gap has remained virtually unchanged since 1992, with Black wealth constituting barely 15% of white wealth. And projections show it could take centuries to bridge that divide at the current rate. So we may never catch up. Black households' wealth are also much less diversified, relying very heavily on home equity and or vehicles rather than investment. But anyway, I bring up home ownership and all of those things because they are truly the cornerstone of the American dream. And this cornerstone of the American dream has largely been inaccessible for many Black families due to discriminatory practices. How many of you have heard of redlining? Let me tell you what redlining is. Beginning in the 1930s, federal policies and real estate practices like redlining systematically denied mortgages and insurance to Black neighborhoods, deeming them hazardous. This actually starved some Black communities of credit. It depressed their property value, and it created conditions for predatory lending practices, which we still see today. And even when Black folks could access home ownership, they were often steered into these riskier subprime loans, which led to disproportionate foreclosures, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. The homeownership gap between Black and white families has remained strikingly stable, even widening in recent decades, severely impeding intergenerational wealth. So let's talk about education. My favorite. For me, education is the I'll say the gap filler. Education is seen as the means of equalization, but that too is severely impacted by segregation. The separate but equal Plessy versus Ferguson ruling legitimized that separate but equal, leading to, underfunded, overcrowded Black schools with poorly trained teachers and inadequate resources. And so, despite these injustices, though, Black communities mobilized to establish their own schools. Hence, HBCUs were born, historically Black colleges and universities, because Black folks wanted to be educated too and were not really allowed. However, these institutions too often lack the funding and the resources of their white counterparts. And the last point I want to speak on with regards to the American dream from a cultural perspective: safety, justice, and police brutality. The promise of liberty and justice for all has been consistently undermined by systemic racism and police brutality. The disproportionate targeting and mistreatment of Black individuals by law enforcement highlight a fundamental denial of safety and equal protection under the law, making the pursuit of happiness and security a constant challenge. What we know now is that the current administration, President Trump, has put forth an executive order to remove these and other protections. The disproportionate targeting and mistreatment of Black individuals by law enforcement, as was evident in so many cases leading up to the deaths of Martin and Eric and George. Don't get me started. I can go on, and countless others. To know that this not only exists, but is a serious problem in the United States, so much so that policies had to be enacted to protect this marginalized group, and then to blatantly deny, remove that protection. Why? Political participation and social acceptance. The fight for political participation, epitomized by the civil rights movement, by the struggle for voting rights, was central to achieving this American dream. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." That speech articulated a vision of a nation where people of all races live together as brothers, as sisters, judged by their character and not by their skin color. Yet, the struggle for true social acceptance and equality continues, with many Black Americans feeling the nation has not gone far enough in ensuring equal rights. And to now have those very rights removed by the sitting president, the president of a country built completely from immigrants. Immigrants from Europe and Asia and Africa, yes, all seeking a better life, except for the Africans who did not come by choice, but were largely stolen and then sold and subsequently told that they were worthless, less than tools to build up this land, and that their very existence was to be decided by mere man. Can you comprehend? See, the course for them had been set. They were allowed to advance but so far, in which they had better learn their place and forget who they think that they are. Recognize the scar? So they fought with all that they had to create for themselves a new space where they could live together in love and carry themselves with some grace. They loved, they learned, they led, they marched, they fought, they bled for basic human rights, which for them was not in sight. No one ever made it right. But we are to forget their plight. So, today's lesson on the American dream from a cultural perspective, that culture being Black Americans. Hear and respect our voices, because to say the very least, we have earned every right removed, and we deserve every feast. Modern oppression must cease. From the starved, misguided slave patrol like days of old police. Keep your unwanted attention. And yes, redemption is owed for the lynching. And yet history has revealed to us there's no justifying prize. What 40 acres and a mule? Ooh, there'll be nothing for you. So, resilience, redefinition, despite these immense obstacles, Black Americans have continuously strived for and redefined the American dream. Their pursuit is characterized by perseverance and hope. Figures like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass embodied the resilience and the determination to overcome slavery and advocate for liberation through education and activism. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat, demonstrated the power of collective action and nonviolent protest to dismantle segregation and to demand equal rights, fundamentally reshaping the landscape of the American dream for all. So, I want to talk about one of my favorite eras, the Harlem Renaissance period. Movements like the Harlem Renaissance, which is just, to me, it was the epitome of Black pride and Black excellence in a time when Blacks weren't supposed to do or be seen one of my most favorite periods, which gave us Langston Hughes and Dr. Maya Angelou and James Baldwin and others, showcasing a new spirit of self-determination, of pride, and cultural expression, challenging racist stereotypes and asserting a distinct Black identity. Fast forward to today. The year is 2025. Today, Black Americans continue to advocate for policies that address racial and economic inequalities, emphasizing the need for systemic change in areas like education, healthcare, housing, and asset building to achieve sustained prosperity and security. For Black Americans, the American dream, it's not a static ideal, but an evolving, often bittersweet journey. It is a dream that acknowledges the historical injustices and the ongoing systemic barriers, while simultaneously embodying an unwavering hope for true equality, justice, and the full realization of America's foundational promises for all of its citizens. It is a dream that demands not just individual effort, but fundamental societal transformation. We are not what has been crafted in small minds that we should be. I am an inheritor of this planet. I have earned this space. No amount of assimilation can control, alternate, delete me or my authentic history. Because whether or not we ever come to agree to stabilize this earthly ball that we all live on requires a united state of equivalency. So how do we move forward? Well, we need to examine the ongoing challenges of racial bias and discrimination in contemporary modern-day America. We need to explore strategies for promoting racial understanding, empathy, and dialogue, leaving you all with a call to action. Do something. Do something you've never done before, for someone you've never done anything before. Do something for someone that doesn't look like you. Speak up. Speak out. I watched a video the other day. It was a college classroom setting, and the instructor was a middle-aged white man. He may have been English, British. But there was a class full of college students. A young lady walked in, and she looked like she may have been of Hispanic descent. She sat down, and the instructor, the professor, said to her, "You get your things and leave my class. I don't want to see you in here." And she looked puzzled. She looked around the room. The whole room got quiet. And she said, "Excuse me?" And he repeated himself. He said, "Gather your things, leave my class. I don't want to see you in here." and she gathered up her things, very confused. I was confused. At any rate, she gathered her things and she exited the class. The entire class was quiet, and the professor said, Why didn't any of you say anything? Why didn't any of you say anything? Or did you? I forget. I'm screwing it up. But at any rate, no one said anything. And that lesson was, if you see something and you know it to be wrong, keeping quiet is being complicit. To me, it says either I agree with what's happening, and if you don't have an opinion, then, you might be part of the problem. But say something. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And we are all on this ball together. We have to live together. And what we do not need is to be set back to 1860, to the slave patrol days of old, or Jim Crow era. This lesson today is very personal for me because I am Black in America, and I hold out hope. I am resilient and I'm persistent. And so I leave you with this lesson, and I implore you to do something. This has been Get Your Fucking Lessons, people. Thanks for watching.